We've now reached the last session of the day, and one I know we're all very interested in hearing from our recently appointed Secretary of State. Jeremy Wright became Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport in July this year, after serving 4 years as Attorney General, the government's Chief Law Officer. Jeremy has been an MP for 13 years and represents the constituency of Kenilworth and Southam in the West Midlands. Now, we've heard many suggestions today on how to level the playing fields between the broadcast community and the new tech giants. And in fact, some very practical solutions there from Sharon White in the last session. So we look forward to hearing Jeremy's thoughts on those suggestions as he opens with some introductory remarks. So please welcome the Secretary of State, Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much. Mr. David, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much to the Royal Television Society for inviting me to come, although I am conscious that I'm all that stands between you and the bar, and you've had a long day. So I hope you'll bear with me. I am going to make some introductory remarks and then, of course, take questions if you have them. And I should start by saying that I feel very fortunate to have had this role in government for the last 3 months. One of the many interesting things about heading up DCMS is it provides an opportunity to play a part in the blistering advances in technology that are transforming all of our lives. And of course, as leaders in the media and creative industries, you know about these advances better than most. In this rapidly changing and increasingly polarized world, the role of the media is evolving, and in my view, becoming more important than ever. For the media and for the television industry in particular, trust is a vital commodity. It may not capture the imagination in quite the same way as a new drama, be as immediately celebrated as an overnight Barb rating, or even be treasured quite as much as new revenue. But all broadcasters need trust to succeed. In an era of rapid technological change, infinite consumer choice, and spectacularly resourced international competition, trust is something that is vital to the success of British media. So I want to talk today about what the TV industry, and public service broadcasters in particular, can do to maintain that trust and help us address some of the most pressing issues in our society and our democracy. The most obvious aspect of trust is in relation to the accuracy of news. Disinformation and misinformation is one of the most significant issues of our age. We've all seen how it can sow discord and pose a risk to free and fair elections. And in my previous role of Attorney General, I saw firsthand how it can jeopardize our criminal process. As the digital revolution continues to transform our lives, the potential to disrupt our civil society and democratic institutions becomes greater than ever. An emerging example is how artificial intelligence can be used to manipulate audio and video content quickly and in ways that make it very hard for consumers to detect. Now, while this has many potentially exciting benefits for the creative industries, such as redubbing films and television in different languages, it can also be employed in the creation of what are called deep fakes. That is to say, very realistic but nonetheless fake audio and video content. For example, the widely cited video of President Obama that I know you saw earlier. Given the speed of technological change, it's perhaps no wonder that according to Reuters, only 42% of people trust the news they read. Crucially, however, 70% of viewers consider television a trustworthy source of news. And this is something for the industry to be proud of. But while TV is still where most adults in the UK turn for their news, that's not true for younger audiences. Indeed, Ofcom found that for 82% of 16 to 24-year-olds, the internet is their first port of call. And yet, while people are increasingly turning to the online space for news, less than a third of people believe that most news apps and websites are trustworthy. As we all know, the internet, once described by a former executive at Google as the largest experiment in anarchy, is not a place where fact and fiction can be easily distinguished. And in our digital charter, we set out a clear goal to tackle disinformation and misinformation here in the UK. One of the ways we'll do this is by giving people the digital literacy and critical thinking skills needed to properly assess online content. And this will add to the important work that's being done by the Times, the Guardian Foundation, the BBC, and others in launching products to improve media literacy. We're also developing a range of regulatory and non-regulatory measures to improve transparency and accountability online and thus tackle a range of online harms. But I want to take this opportunity to spend a moment on one of the most egregious examples of inaccurate information online. Following the Salisbury incident, Russia has begun a blatant disinformation campaign with misleading procedural questions and over 40 different official narratives, all false. Many of these were carried and promoted on Kremlin-backed media. Russia Today, funded by the Russian state, is a major concern. Ofcom has repeatedly found that RT has been in violation of standards, including cases where when Ofcom say RT's coverage has been labelled materially misleading. Ofcom currently has 10 investigations into the impartiality of RT's news and current affairs programmes. I welcome these investigations, and I await their conclusions with great interest. Now, it is true that the tech sector has been taking action, especially Twitter, to make mounting disinformation campaigns more difficult and costly. And this has included the development of algorithms to spot fake accounts and the deletion of hundreds of thousands of suspect accounts, many linked to hostile states such as Russia. But of course, they can and should do more in this battle. Our democracy depends on it. And as well as tackling sources of inaccurate information, we want to strengthen and support high-quality sources that people can trust. High-quality and properly researched journalism is the best possible weapon in our battle against fake news. And so the sustainability of our high-quality media is something that should concern us all. In March, we launched an independent review chaired by Dame Frances Cairncross to look at how the production and distribution of high-quality news journalism can be sustained in a changing market, with a particular focus on the online space. The call for evidence closed just 2 days ago, and I look forward to Dame Frances' report and recommendations early next year. Similarly, the PSBs and other trusted broadcasters have a vital role to play. As well as continuing to provide high-quality news on linear TV, PSBs must also work to reach a wider audience. And we've seen a lot of success here. For example, Channel 4 News. On Facebook, they get 60 million views a month, the largest of any British news programme. And last year, they had 2 billion video views across Facebook and YouTube. Now, it's not for me to tell PSBs or other major broadcasters how to operate, but I welcome these developments, and I am sure we will see more of them in the coming years. Of course, the accuracy of news is not the only way for PSBs to generate trust. Our public service broadcasters are national institutions. For decades, they've entertained, informed, and educated, establishing a trust which was inherited from generation to generation. For a long time, this was never in doubt. Until 1997, most people only had access to 4 television channels. But of course, as you've been hearing, the market is now changing rapidly. Competition for eyeballs, subscriptions, and most importantly, time, has never been more intense. Data has become key in the battle to produce the next hit. Global media giants with vast audience analysis budgets are operating at a significant advantage. We often hear how our PSBs struggle to compete against these leviathans, and that may be true in part when it comes to some budgets. But for the same money that Netflix spent on the first 2 series of The Crown, the BBC made 18 series, which were seen by 74% of the population. Our PSBs have so many unique advantages that they need to exploit to the full. But as national institutions in a multi-channel world, they must also work to secure the trust of the whole United Kingdom. One example is making younger viewers just as engaged in PSB programming as their parents were. Younger viewers are more open to new technology and more receptive to new brands than any generation before them. And this change in consumption habits is showing no sign of slowing down. So you must reach them where they want to be reached, and they must find you where they expect you to be found. I want to see the PSBs being nimble, working across platforms, innovating and collaborating. Internationally, this has been a success. BritBox is showing the best of British to viewers in the US and Canada. PSBs should not be afraid of building on this success at home. And to support this, we're launching a contestable fund pilot of up to £60 million to stimulate the provision and plurality of original UK content for young audiences, both on linear TV and on demand. This will help create new funding avenues for creators of original content and bring new voices to the market. We will be publishing a policy paper shortly on the final design, and I strongly encourage the commercial PSBs and other free-to-air broadcasters to demonstrate their commitment to young audiences by supporting the fund once it's launched in April next year. PSBs are national institutions, and at their best, they have an innate ability to tap into the mood of the nation. This is their competitive edge. And so it's crucial that these organizations are made up of the people that they serve, both on and off screen. We all know that people want content that speaks to them and their experiences. And this means people from different regions, ethnic backgrounds, and social groups. Proper representation is vital to maintaining the trust of different audiences. 83% of viewers think it's important that PSBs portray their region fairly. However, only 63% think that they do. I'm very pleased that the BBC and Channel 4 have agreed to increase their regional impact, and I hope other broadcasters will continue to do more. More than half of black viewers felt that there weren't enough black people on TV, and when they are, 51% feel that they are portrayed negatively. This means asking some searching questions too about the makeup of our media organizations. Because knowing how to evolve to meet the needs of younger, more diverse audiences as they get older is easier if you employ them. And this means providing genuine opportunities for those who have talent but may not yet be the finished product or might not know the right people. Michaela Cole talked compellingly in Edinburgh just a few weeks ago about how in her early years in the TV industry, she felt like a misfit or an outsider. As national institutions, it's your job to invite people in. By doing so, you will not only create and solidify that trust, you will secure it for generations to come. So today, I'm asking you to go further in your efforts by doing more to build trust in the accuracy of news through high-quality journalism and reporting, by doing more to provide for diverse, young and UK-wide audiences and exploring innovative ways to reach them, and by providing opportunities for underrepresented groups, both on and off screen. In exchange, the government will support PSBs to ensure they continue to thrive and stay prominent as part of a healthy, sustainable, and dynamic media landscape. So I can assure you I will be looking closely at the results of Ofcom's work on prominence and work with the PSBs and the whole sector to ensure the government is playing our part in supporting the future of public service broadcasting at the very heart of our vibrant media sector. Broadcasting is one of this country's greatest success stories. Our extraordinary content and talent are respected around the world. Indeed, the UK recently reclaimed top position in the Global Soft Power Index, driven in large part by our culture and creative industries, not least our superb broadcasting sector. Shows and formats such as Doctor Who and Bake Off are known and admired the world over, and one study found that among US readers, 4 of the 10 most trusted sources of news are based in Britain. We need to build on this, because a strong media means a strong democracy and a strong nation. And we cannot be complacent. Those sowing discord want to undermine this trust and the institutions upon which our liberal democracy relies. Trust is a precious commodity, and bolstering it is vital to our future. So thank you for the part that you play in this, and that you will continue to play. I will be on your side as you do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So next year.
Now, I'm sure the Secretary of State is somewhat relieved that it isn't Kirsty Wark asking incisive questions, but I have to confess I have been studying her this afternoon. So
Good.
So let's go. So first of all, on internet regulation, I think Sharon White and Damien Collins made very powerful cases for leveling the playing field for regulation. But for it to happen, it needs the government to legislate. So what plans do you have in that area, and when do you think it will happen?
Well, as to when, I think that's putting the cart before the horse. The first question to ask is what? And I think what you need to do in this is to approach this in what I would call a logical way. And I apologize for the fact that I'm a lawyer, so bits of this is my lawyer brain talking. But I think you've got to ask the right questions in the right order. And what I mean by that is you've got to start by asking yourself, what are the harms that you are trying to minimize or, if possible, remove altogether? You've then got to ask yourself, what responsibility do online companies have for minimizing or removing those harms? And I don't think you just ask yourself, what do they call themselves? You ask yourself, what do they do? You then ask yourself, how do you put in place structures to enable those responsibilities to be carried out? And then finally, you ask yourself, if those responsibilities are not met, then what should happen to those online companies? Who is responsible for holding them to account? That's the series of questions you need to ask. None of this is straightforward. There are interesting examples abroad. I'm going to be in Germany next week speaking to my counterparts, and I'm sure this subject will come up. And I want to look at the German example, and I want to look at other examples of how this might be done. But I'm conscious of the need to get it right, because if we don't get it right, two things will happen. First of all, you can guarantee whatever system of restriction or regulation we might come up with will be robustly challenged by those subject to it. And the second thing that will happen is the rest of the world will look at what we're doing. And I want to make sure that what we're doing is a good example, not a flawed example. So I will apologize now if it takes a little bit longer than people might like, but I'm quite keen to get it right. I hope you are too. And I think it's more important to get it right than to get it done fast.
Thank you. Tony Hall made a strong argument today for improved funding for the BBC. Looking forward to the next license fee settlement, will you turn a deaf ear to those requests, or are you open to increasing the license fee?
I'm certainly not going to turn a deaf ear to requests. I'll listen carefully to the arguments that are made to me. I think it's worth recognising a couple of things, though. First of all, the BBC licence fee brought in a lot more money last year than it did the year before. We've closed the loophole in relation to the iPlayer, which helps the BBC considerably in terms of their funding settlement too. So it isn't true, I think, to say that the BBC are starved of cash, but I think it is worth listening to arguments about what we need to do in order to present the best possible public service broadcasters, able to do some of the jobs I was describing a moment or so ago. So I'll certainly listen to the arguments, but I will expect the BBC to do their best with the resources they have available to them now, and then I'll listen carefully to the arguments they make to me for more.
At this stage, I'd like to open up to the audience. Does anybody have any questions for the Secretary of State? Over
there. Tim Marshall, RTS Thames Valley. If I could just pick up on the last point you made. This morning I saw the Director General, who I think we both started as boys together in the BBC, make an impassioned speech, which I don't think he was bluffing on, that there have been cuts and cuts and cuts over the years. There was undoubtedly days of plenty in the BBC. But I saw an executive today who was virtually saying we've got to the end now before damage is done, and damage I would suggest that can never be rebuilt. We're at that stage. Going back to the licence payer for more, or the amount that's required, I think is politically unacceptable. But we've talked all day about the great revenues that are being made by the new players. Is there no way of attracting some of that to support our public service broadcasting? Because I think it does need significant revenue, and I don't think the Director General is bluffing.
Well, look, 3 months in, I think it would be unwise for any minister to rule out anything absolutely. So I'm going to listen very carefully to the argument that Tony Hall and others at the BBC will make to me on all of this. As I say, as a politician, I've heard an awful lot of definition of cuts in my time. I think it's, again, worth remembering. The BBC licence fee brought more in last year than it did the year before. But I will listen to the arguments. There are a number of things we have to consider here. And we've talked a lot in the course, or you've talked a lot, I think, in the course of the day about the levelling of playing fields. There are levelings of playing fields that need to be considered in regulatory terms, and there may be others too. I will listen carefully to all of those arguments, but I think it's important to recognise that the money must come from somewhere. It may be that there is scope to look at some of the other businesses in this sector, but at the moment, what I want to do is make sure I've understood the territory completely before I start to make what might turn out to be rash decisions.
Another question, fifth from the front, Adam.
Thank you. Adam Minns, Commercial Broadcasters Association. You haven't mentioned the fate of international broadcasters who may have to relocate following Brexit, which I take is not a good sign. We know that country of origin is gone. We know the status quo is not going to happen. What is your position? What's your aim? Do you think there is anything for international channels in the forthcoming negotiations with the EU?
Well, I was just enjoying not talking about Brexit for a change, but
there had to be a Brexit question.
There had to be a Brexit question. Well, look, first of all, the status quo isn't going to happen, and that's because a decision's been taken, first of all, by the British electorate to leave the European Union, and secondly, not to remain in the single market. That has consequences. But I don't think that what is fully understood, certainly in this room, I'm sure it's completely understood, but outside this room, what's not fully understood is the degree of continuity that there's going to be. So first of all, it's worth recognising that the Withdrawal Act, the EU Withdrawal Act, transfers European rules and regulations, broadly speaking, into domestic law. So the AVMSD, please don't make me explain what the acronym means, will be, I expect, confirmed in European law by the end of this year. In other words, before the UK leaves the EU. What that means is that most of the provisions of the AVMSD will be transferred into domestic law too. The bit that won't be is the bit we can't control, which is whether or not other European countries are prepared to open up their market to allow broadcast direct from here to there. We can't control that bit. But there are other aspects in there that we can and which we will incorporate into domestic law. So many of the standards provisions in AVMSD will be transferred into domestic law, assuming the timetable works as I expect. You've then got the European Convention on Transfrontier Television. And it's important, I think, to factor that into this too. So for those countries that are signatories to that, and there are a number of EU countries that are, that provides for the possibility of direct transmission into those countries from the UK. And crucially, under that particular convention, we are part still of the European Works regime, and the EU has confirmed that that is its view as well. So if you're producing content in this country, you want it to count as European works, it still will. So there are a number of areas in which I think we can offer some reassurance. We cannot say the world will be exactly the same as it was before our departure from the EU, because that's patently not the case. But we can, I think, offer some reassurance that in a number of areas there will be continuity and there will be opportunity. And that, of course, doesn't allow for whatever we may succeed in negotiating with the EU over the course of negotiations over the next few months.
Next question, please.
Hi, Jim Waterson, media editor at The Guardian. Sharon White sketched out a potential regulatory system for the tech companies and said it's up to you to decide what you think of it. So first of all, what do you think of it? And would you consider a financial levy on tech companies such as Facebook to pay for journalism?
Well, as I say, I will consider a number of options, and what I'll be interested to know is how is the argument made to me? How persuasive will it be? How's it paid for? All of those things. Look, I think that we've got to make every effort to preserve good quality journalism. And that involves a number of different things. It involves looking at the competition that there is between more traditional forms of media and what comes online. It involves having a look at what's going on to local journalism at the moment. It looks at all of those things. And I'm making no predeterminations apart from anything else, because we've asked, quite sensibly in my view, Frances Cairncross to put together her thoughts and her recommendations. When I have those, that will give me a good basis for considering how we might go about the preservation of good quality journalism. And one of the things she's looking at is the impact of what's happening online on the ability to present good quality, well-resourced, well-researched journalism. So there are lots of people thinking about this at the moment. Now, I accept absolutely, we can't wait forever to make decisions, but I do think it's sensible to allow ourselves the maximum opportunity to understand the issues fully, and I apply this mostly to myself, before we make decisions about any of this, because much as we might like to believe otherwise, these are not simple choices, and every choice we make, particularly in regulatory terms, will have consequences. So, I'm certainly up for the debate, and I'm up for considering all sensible suggestions put to me, and when I've considered them all, then we'll make the best decisions we can.
At the front on the right, please.
Hello, I'm Ben Fenton from Edelman. My organisation's been surveying trust in this country for more than a decade. One of the things that we identify is that there is a sort of tonality of trust depending on how people view institutions and sectors. And we know that the media sector has different tonalities of regulation. Broadcasting is regulated statutorily, and that is embedded in neutrality and impartiality, certainly as far as news is concerned. Newspapers are regulated with a tonality that is based on independence, self-regulation, etc., etc. The one, broadcasting, is trusted as a source of information quite considerably more than the other. Looking forward to the tonality of control or regulation of the internet, would you prefer it to be the tonality of broadcasting or closer to the tonality of the newspaper industry?
Well, I think one of the challenges here is that whereas previously, over the course of the time you've been looking at these issues, I suspect, it was relatively straightforward to say print media is here, broadcasting is here, internet is here, and they're separate entities, they do different things in different ways. One of the biggest challenges, I think, is that those boundaries between each of those are breaking down. So it is harder to see that what broadcasting does, what the internet does, what print media does, are all completely different entities which don't touch each other. Now, what that means, I think, is that you have to accept that if all of those boundaries are breaking down, we have to take a fresh look at the regulatory landscape as well and decide whether we've got the right regulatory structures now for the new world that needs regulating. Now, the most obvious example of that is the examples that Sharon was giving, which demonstrate, I think, very clearly there's an assumption that's been in place for a long time that the internet can't be regulated. You'll break the internet if you regulate the internet. Well, that might have been true when the internet did something very distinct from what everyone else does, and you could justify a different regulatory approach from a fundamental basis. I don't think you can do that anymore. So we need to have a look at not what people call themselves, that's the point I was making earlier on, but what they actually do. And what they do leads them, I think, to certain responsibilities. Regulation is designed to hold people to account for how they fulfill their responsibilities. So I think we need a proper look, not just at the way in which the media operates at the moment across all those sectors, but then at the proper methods for regulation, if regulation is necessary. And I don't shrink from that if we consider it is necessary, but the regulatory structures have got to match what they're regulating, rather than try and fit everything into boxes that no longer really, I think, represent the world we look at.
Across the existing structures as well as so you're saying you need to look again at the way newspapers and television.
Well, I rule nothing out, as I think I've made clear, and I think it's important that we have regulatory structures that regulate effectively the landscape we're looking at now. And if the boundaries are breaking down between those different segments, then it wouldn't be sensible, in my view, simply to say, let's add on a regulator for the internet and not worry terribly much about the fact that those borders are becoming increasingly porous. That would not be a sensible view. Now, that doesn't mean to say, if Sharon's still here and panicking, that we say, right, we're about to abolish Ofcom. That doesn't necessarily follow. But I think it's sensible to look at the whole regulatory structure if you're going to look at the whole structure of things that are to be regulated.
Well, thank you very much. We've now run out of time. So thank you very much, Secretary of
pleasure.
State.
Good to see you.
And I'm now going to hand you over to James Correll, my colleague, to close out the conference. Thank you.